Hi, I'm Anna Galelli, and we are now going to do part B of Unit 3, looking at the spinal nerves a little bit more closely. All right, so looking at these spinal nerves, you've got this whole section which is summarizing everything you need to know. So 31 pairs, thousands of fibers, most of them are mixed. The naming convention can be a little bit confusing because we change what we do. So we've got one set of rules here, and then a different set of rules. So this is rule number 2, and this is rule number 1. Okay? So with the cervicals, all right, you've got 8 cervical nerves, and it's because of the way you've got one nerve coming out above C1. All right? So you'll see right here, so these nerves are superior to the name of the vertebra, okay? So if I have the C1 vert, then the C1 nerve comes out here. Let me do it down here. So if I've got verts here, this is C1, this is C2, and this is C3, all right? And those are the vertebra. Then this is the C1 nerve, that's the C2 nerve, and that is the C3 nerve, okay? But then you get to this area that gets wonky, all right? So this is T12. Excuse me, not T12, that's not what I wanted. This is C7, and then you've got T1, and let's do T2, okay? So here what you have is the C7 nerve, all right? And then you have the C8 nerve. And now, instead of the vertebrae being named for the bone above it, it's going to be named for the bone below it, okay? So now you've got the T1 nerve, the T2 nerve. Okay, so because of this naming convention, we end up with 8 cervical nerves, but once we get down below, we've got 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal, which is C0. All right, coming over here to the picture, you will see that the C1 nerves are where the cervical vertebrae are. Same thing with the T nerves, the lumbar nerves, sacral, etc., and so forth. All right, so moving on. All right, so when we were looking at the spinal cord, we looked at the orientation of these structures. So you've got right here your spinal cord. Within that space, inside the vertebral foramen, I have the ventral root and I have my dorsal root. Those two things then come together and they start to form the spinal nerve. So this whole section right here is inside the vertebral foramen. Okay? The spinal nerve leaves the bone through the inner vertebral foramina. Vertebral foramina. Okay? Now you are truly in this PNS. So that's the other thing, is this section is still inside the central nervous system, whereas this section is truly in the peripheral nervous system, okay? The spinal nerve is going to be mixed, where it's going to have fibers from both the dorsal root and from the ventral root coming in. And you remember dorsal is, I hate that when I do that. You've got sensory, whereas with ventral, you've got motor, okay? And so the spinal nerve is typically mixed. And then you're going to have fibers from both the ventral and root. You're going to have both sensory and motor going out the ventral ramus and out the dorsal ramus. And then you've got other little branches here. Off the ventral ramus, we give rise to the autonomic nervous system structures with the rami communicantes. All right, so what are the differences between the rami and the roots? Okay, so let me erase some of this stuff. So the roots and the rami. The roots are inside the bone. The rami are outside the bone. So that's talking about what it's found, okay? Now, what does it hold? The roots are sensory or motor. The rami communicantes are going to be both, okay? Sensory and motor will be found in both, because you obviously want sensory and motor going to the anterior body through the ventral ramus, and you want sensory and motor going to the posterior body through the dorsal ramus. All right, next slide. All right, so right here, you've got the body of your vertebra. And then you can see right here, the spinal cord, all right? And I've got white matter, and I've got gray matter. I can see the pointy tip, which is the posterior horn, and I can see the curved shoulder, which is my anterior horn, okay? Now, coming out of the posterior horn, I have the dorsal root, which is sensory, which is going to come into here, into the dorsal root ganglion, where I have cell bodies for my sensory neurons. Then coming out of the anterior horn, I have my ventral root fibers, which are all motor. They're going to come together here. And then they are going to come together to form the spinal nerve. And then that's going to split into the dorsal ramus going to the posterior of the body, and the ventral ramus going to the anterior of the body. All right, now, with these nerves, you want to create a system of redundancy so that if one area gets damaged, you're still getting innervation to different parts of your body. So we create what is called a nerve plexus, where you've got interconnecting fibers from different ventral rami all coming together and mixing up to form your peripheral nerves. We've got three major regions. We've got up here in our neck, so touch the side of your neck, that's the cervical plexus. Further down, where you can't feel it so well, is your brachial plexus. Now, the thoracic nerves mostly don't do plexi. There will be some of the T1, T2 going into the brachial plexus and like T12 fibers going into the lumbar plexus. But most of the thoracic nerves we also call intercostal nerves, and they just directly go out, okay, from the thoracic region and wrap around. So they're not forming nerve plexes that much, okay? A little bit of contributions, a little bit of variation on what's in there, but mostly not. Now, over here, we've got the lumbar plexus. And this is interesting because what you find is this conus medullaris, when you were a fetus, it was actually down here. And then as you grew, it got pulled up. And then all these spinal nerves got stretched out as it was being pulled up. So the lumbar and sacral region of the spinal cord is not what you think it is. This is actually the sacral region of your spinal cord. And this is actually the lumbar region of your spinal cord. So this lumbar enlargement is where you've got a lot of lumbar nerves coming out. And then we also have the cervical enlargement right here, which is giving rise to nerves that are going to go out through the cervical and brachial plexus, more the brachial. But you get the idea. Now, to see the bulk of the lumbar nerves, you're looking at this part of the cauda equina because it's going out through these areas of the intervertebral foramen of your lumbar vertebrae. The sacral nerves are down here, and they're mostly coming out through the sacrum, okay? And then you got your teeny tiny little coccygeal nerves, C01, or C0, get rid of that one. Some books labeled that way. I don't like that. I just like to think of it as C0. So C0, okay? And I think that's it for this slide, so let's move on. All right, so if you get to graduate school, you may end up having to memorize the cervical plexus. We are not going to memorize all of these, okay? So you do not need to memorize those. Just know that these give rise to different peripheral nerves, okay? What I want to focus on is you got the C1, C2, C3, C4, C5. Now, let's just look at, say, this area right here. This could have branches of fibers that are coming down like this, that are coming down, maybe like this, okay? And then fibers from here that are coming here. And then this one can even have some that go up and go like this. So basically, by the time you get to this, you've got fibers for C1, 2, 3, and 4 all merging in together, taking different pathways to form the mixed nerves of the supraclavicular nerve. All of these are like this. Now, the only one of the cervical plexus nerves you're going to memorize is the phrenic nerve, and you should be able to identify that on a picture, okay? And you should know that it's got fibers from C3 through C5 all mixing in to do this. What does it do? It goes to your diaphragm muscle and innervates your diaphragm. And that is why you need to memorize it, because it's one of the more important nerves for breathing and for respiration. And it's nice that its origin, so let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, okay? So 1, 2, 3, so it's originating up here. When people fracture, damage their spinal cord in a neck injury, it's more likely to be down here, which means you're not damaging your phrenic nerve so you can survive the injury. If you damage your neck up here, there's a good chance you're going to stop breathing and die of respiratory failure, okay? But most people who end up being quadriplegic and surviving, their injuries are more down here, okay? Where do hiccups come from? This phrenic nerve runs along the sides here and here near your esophagus. And when you swallow or eat, or say if you eat something really spicy, the pain signals can actually irritate the phrenic nerve, causing it to do twitches, which is what gives you hiccups. All right, so let's look at the brachial plexus now. You will see the rami coming out here. I'm not going to ask you to memorize those. They form trunks here. Again, just know that that's there. I'm not going to ask you to memorize it. Then you get into this section right here. Okay, I'm not going to ask you to memorize that. What I am going to ask you to memorize are the chords, because you can see those very nicely and easily in a cadaver. The one that is most lateral is the lateral chord. The one that's most posterior is the posterior chord, and the one that's most medial is the medial chord. Now what you need to know is that each chord gives rise to different nerves. So for example, I have my ulnar nerve here, and the ulnar nerve is going to be coming from the medial chord. But here I have my median nerve, which is going to have fibers from the lateral chord and the medial chord coming together. These nerves all form a very distinctive pattern. So there's your musculocutaneous. Here's the radial coming off the posterior chord. And you need to know which chord gives rise to each nerve, and then basically what each nerve does. So there's a little box right here that tells you what it does. So for example, if I told you that someone could still do elbow flexion, all right, but they could not do shoulder abduction. Well, the axillary nerve suggests that that's going to the deltoid, whereas the musculocutaneous is going to elbow flexors. So if someone was having that injury, then what you could say is, well, here's my axillary, so probably my posterior cord is just fine, okay? But if they can't do elbow flexion, and that's coming off the musculocutaneous, okay, so they got a gunshot wound that may have nicked that lateral cord, but the posterior cord is fine. So you can use this information to figure out where an injury is and what kind of injury is occurring, which is why you memorize the pattern. All right, so you're going to be doing a drawing where you write out the pattern and flow of the brachial nerves from the cords up here. So you've got the V formation, all right, that's going to give rise to the median cord, okay? And then, excuse me, that's in the wrong spot. Here's the V formation. So I always look for the V that gives rise to the median. So let's actually flip back to the previous slide. Actually, I can't do that without it messing this up. Hold on a second. All right, so I quickly drew this out so that you can see the lateral cord, the medial cord, and then I look for the V, and that helps me find what I'm looking for. So there's my V, and then the posterior cord is back here behind the whole thing. Then coming out of the V, oops, let me change colors. I'm gonna get my median nerve. Now, it's really important to spell this right because you've got median nerve and medial cord. So if you're answering a question, you put down median, and I was asking about the medial cord, it's technically wrong. So you either need to make sure that you always write down nerve or cord, or that you actually write down the correct thing so that you don't mix it up with something that's so similarly spelled. Okay, so you'll see over here a box. You should be able to answer these questions. I mean, these will show up on the quizzes. So if I damage the median nerve, what's going to happen? Well, if I come over here, I'm going to say I'm going to have problems with flexion of the elbow, wrist, and fingers, okay? On the other hand, if I damage the brachial plexus, it really depends on what part I damage as to what happens. If I damage the lateral cord, that's going to impact the axillary nerve and the median nerve, but it's maybe not going to impact the medial cord, and you'll see that the medial cord right here gives rise to the ulnar nerve. So I may have problems doing flexion and these things up here, but I may be able to do some flexion of my medial fingers, for example, or I may still have some sensation on my skin. So you can use this information to figure out what parts are damaged, which is what I'm emphasizing here. So let me kind of erase this stuff so we can draw out the pattern. So you can draw this on yourself, draw it on a paper. So I've got my V, that's the first thing I find. Then I've got my median nerve coming down here. Then off of my medial cord, I then see my ulnar nerve. Those are the easy ones to find. Now here is my lateral cord, and you can see that it's going to branch, and I'm going to have the musculocutaneous nerve and the axial nerve, which is going to go posterior to the bone and wrap around it. Okay? And then off of my posterior cord, we're going to see, and sometimes it's easier to come down here and find it and trace it up, the radial nerve coming off of my posterior cord. Okay? All right, next slide. Oh, wait a second. I think I might have misspoke. So so let's say the axillary and the radial all come off of that posterior cord. I think I may have said something differently just a second ago. So just make sure you're clear on that. Okay? All right, now the next slide. All right, so let's look at the lumbar plexus. So you can see you've got contributions from those lumbar nerves going out through the ventral rami, okay? One thing you should notice is that the lumbar plexus is up here, whereas the sacral plexus is going to be down there. And sometimes we call this the lumbosacral plexus. Okay? Now, these are the nerves that I want you to know. You're going to be learning the obturator and the femoral nerves and what they do. So these are the muscles. So you should remember when you did your muscle tables, you were collecting information on innervation for those muscles. So you should already have some of that collected. All right, so the obturator, you can see it's got fibers contributing from a couple of different spinal nerves coming down. It's going to go to your adductor area, so the inside thigh and here, okay? And then down in here a little bit as well, all right? Then the femoral is really important, and it's got fibers from several different things coming together, and that also is going to come out and go anteriorly, and it's going to innervate most of the anterior thigh, medial leg, foot, hip, a lot of different areas, okay? All right, now we've got a blow up of the sacral plexus, which they're giving you a better view of from the posterior, okay? And you can see you got fibers all the way from L4 down to C0, okay? These are the big nerves I want you to know: sciatic, tibial, peroneal, also called fibular. You've got the superior and inferior gluteals and the pudendal, because everybody wants to know about sex, right? So right here, I don't know why the bracket flipped like that. That is my sciatic nerve. What's interesting is that the sciatic nerve is actually a combination of my tibial nerve and my peroneal nerve. And then these are going to come down over here, and then notice right here it splits, and you go back to tibial and peroneal, okay? And then those innervate different regions. Now the sciatic nerve is important to us because it's often compressed, and when it's compressed, you get pain or tingling or numbness shooting down your leg, and it's really uncomfortable, and that is called sciatica. It's very, very common. Most people end up dealing with it at some point in time for at least a little while, okay? And then the pudendal nerve right here, all right, you can see all of these on the models, and it goes to your external genitalia and also the anal sphincter, which of course incredibly important to everyone, okay? All right, next slide. All right, so I want you to know the basic pattern of your reflex arc and to be able to explain it. We don't do a whole lot with this in lab. We do this more in lecture course. But anyway, you see right here, we got a nail. Someone stepped on a nail. That triggers a nociceptor, which detects pain, and it sends a signal along your unipolar sensory neuron, which is going to come over here. And then use your imagination. That's in the dorsal root ganglion. All right, then the signal is going to travel into the posterior horn. It's going to synapse with an interneuron here in green. That'll synapse with the motor cell body in the anterior horn. Signal goes along the motor neuron to the effector organ, triggering a withdrawal response when that muscle contracts. Now we've got two pathways. The primary pathway, this reflex arc is the primary pathway, but I think you would like to know that you stepped on a nail. So you've got a secondary pathway, which is going to take the signal from here and it's going to go up to the brain. This is much slower. So reflexes are quick and fast, which is good because you want to get your foot off the nail, but you know, you don't need to know that that's what's happening, so you can take a little bit more time to get the information to the brain. So basic withdrawal reflex is also a good example of a basic reflex arc. All right, having studied the muscular system, you basically saw the stretch reflex in action when you were dealing with agonists versus antagonists muscles, okay? So basically what's going to happen here is we are doing knee flexion, okay? So this muscle is contracting, okay? When you do that, you got Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindles, which are going to detect the stretch or the pressure change, depending on which one it is, to this muscle. That's going to send a signal along this sensory neuron into the dorsal root ganglion, where you have your cell body, into the posterior horn, where it's going to synapse either with an interneuron or directly with a motor neuron. Now we're going to follow the red pathway first, so it's sending a signal that's excitatory to the agonist muscle, all right, and to the antagonist muscle. So this is going to be your antagonist, and this is going to be the agonist or synergist, depending on what you're dealing with, okay? And so it's telling this to contract in response to this contraction. So that's why your antagonist contracts when your agonist contracts, so that you don't overdo the stretch on that muscle, so it's resisting the stretch. Now coming back up here to the spinal cord, we had the interneuron, which is synapsing with another motor cell body along this purple motor neuron, which is actually sending an inhibitory action potential to the agonist muscle, telling it to stop contracting, okay? So that is your basic stretch reflex, and now we are done with part 2 of the spinal nerves.